The rancher offered his Apache neighbor shelter. The next day she asked, "Is your offer still good?" His ranch, stretching over hundreds of acres in the high plains of northern Arizona, was more than a job. It was a way of life. Every morning before the sun rose, John was out on the land, checking on his cattle, repairing fences, and walking the trails that crisscrossed the property. To him, the smell of fresh earth, the sound of the wind whispering through the tall grass, and the occasional call of a hawk overhead were as important as the air he breathed. John was used to solitude. Most of his neighbors lived miles away, and the wide-open landscape often made him feel both free and alone at the same time. But he never minded. There was comfort in routine, in knowing each cow by sight, each corner of the ranch by heart, and each season by the way it changed the land. He liked things simple and honest, hard work, clear skies, and a sense that at the end of the day he had done something meaningful. Across the dirt road from John's ranch, on a smaller plot of land near the edge of the forest, lived Maria Whitehorse. Maria was Apache, proud of her heritage, and had recently returned to the region after years of living in the city. Unlike John, Maria was more comfortable with stories, songs, and traditions passed down through generations than with fences and plows. She had grown up in the community but had left for work and education, and now, returning to her roots, she wanted to reconnect with her family, the land, and her ancestors' way of life. When John first saw Maria move in, he watched quietly from his porch. She had a small cabin, modest but sturdy, surrounded by tall cottonwood trees that swayed in the wind. From afar, she seemed determined and independent, carrying her boxes and tools with careful efficiency, pausing only to wave politely when she caught his eye. John had always been respectful of neighbors, especially those who valued their independence, but there was something about Maria's quiet strength that drew his attention. Life on the ranch had taught John to be observant. He noticed when a horse was restless, when a fence post was about to give way, or when a storm was brewing on the horizon. On this particular autumn day, as he mended a fence along the eastern pasture, he noticed the sky darkening earlier than usual. Thick clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and fast, a deep gray that promised more than just a light rain. The wind picked up, rattling the wooden fence and bending the tall grass into a frenzy. John frowned. Storms in northern Arizona were unpredictable, and the last few years had taught him not to underestimate even the calmest-looking clouds. He thought about Maria's cabin across the road. She had moved back only recently, and he wasn't sure how well prepared she was for harsh weather. Her cabin was small, and though it looked well built, it didn't have the storm-proofing of his ranch house, which had been standing strong for decades. John felt a tug in his chest, a mix of concern and responsibility. He didn't know Maria very well, but he had a sense that she was proud, the kind of person who would refuse help unless it was absolutely necessary. Still, John had always believed in offering help when it was needed. As the clouds thickened and the wind carried an edge of chill, John finished his work and went inside the ranch house. He made himself a cup of coffee and looked out the window at the approaching storm. Lightning flickered faintly in the distance, and the sky darkened even more. He knew that by evening the storm could be dangerous. The forecast had warned of heavy rains, gusting winds, and the risk of flash floods. Roads could be washed out, and power lines could go down. John's mind drifted to Maria. Would she be okay? Would she have enough food and water if the power went out? He decided to go over and check on her. Pulling on his boots and jacket, he stepped out into the wind, which now carried the first drops of rain. The smell of wet earth filled the air, sharp and fresh. He crossed the road to Maria's cabin and knocked gently on the door. Maria opened it almost immediately. She was surprised to see him, and for a moment there was a pause, a mutual recognition that neither of them knew exactly what the other was thinking. John gave her a small, respectful nod. "Evening," he said, Storm looks bad. You've got everything you need." Maria smiled politely, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think so," she replied. "Just settling in, that's all." John hesitated, then spoke again. "If you want, you can stay at my place tonight. The storm might get worse and my house is stronger. You'll be safe there." Maria blinked, caught off guard. She opened her mouth to refuse, but something in John's tone made her pause. There was no condescension, no judgment, just concern. She could feel the sincerity in his words. "I thank you," she said carefully. "I'll think about it." John nodded. "No pressure. I just wanted to offer. Storm's coming fast." He tipped his hat and returned to his ranch house, leaving Maria standing in the doorway, listening to the first rolls of thunder in the distance. Back inside his house, John tried to focus on his work, checking the stock, preparing extra feed and securing his barn. But he couldn't stop thinking about Maria. He remembered his own early years on the ranch, when storms had come unexpectedly, when help had been a mile away or even farther. He didn't want anyone to face that alone, especially someone new to the area, someone like Maria. Meanwhile, Maria moved around her cabin, double-checking her supplies. She stacked firewood closer to the door, filled the kettle with water, and made sure her flashlight was ready. Pride whispered in her mind that she could handle the storm herself, but a small voice, a voice she rarely admitted to, reminded her that accepting help was not a weakness. It was human. As the storm drew nearer, the wind picked up and rain began to lash against the cabin walls. The trees groaned under the pressure of the gusts, and lightning illuminated the sky in sharp, blinding flashes. Maria's heart began to race. She remembered John's offer, replayed his words in her mind, and felt a sense of relief she hadn't expected. Maybe it was time to accept the kindness he offered, but she hesitated. She had spent years proving her independence, living in the city, making her own way. Asking for help felt strange, even frightening. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and moved to the window. Across the road, she could see the ranch house, solid and warm-looking even in the storm's shadow. It seemed to beckon, a safe place in a world suddenly feeling too large and unpredictable. The first part of the storm had arrived, and Maria realized she had a choice to make. She could stay in her cabin, relying on her preparations, or she could cross the road and accept John's offer, stepping into a space of trust and connection she had not known she needed. And in that moment, as the wind howled and the rain pounded down, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet, simple comfort of knowing that someone cared, that someone was looking out for her, even before they were truly friends. Little did she know, this small act of kindness would set in motion a series of events that would change not only that stormy night but the course of her relationship with John, the ranch, and the land they both called home. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon was no longer just a distant warning. It had arrived in full force. Rain fell in thick sheets, battering the land with relentless energy. The wind howled across the plains, tugging at trees and making the wooden fences creak and groan. In the small cabin across the road, Maria Whitehorse could feel each gust press against the walls, making the whole structure shiver. She had prepared as best she could, stacked firewood, filled her water containers, checked her supplies. But now, in the middle of the storm, she realized that nature was more powerful than any human preparation. She sat by the window, staring out at the darkness, listening to the storm's growl. Lightning flashed, bright and sudden, casting long, trembling shadows across the cabin. Thunder followed almost immediately, vibrating through the walls and floor. The sound made her jump each time, a reminder that the world outside was alive, untamed, and unpredictable. Maria's mind wandered back to John Reynolds. She remembered his offer from the evening before, his quiet, steady voice that didn't pressure or judge. "If you want, you can stay at my place tonight. The storm might get worse and my house is stronger. You'll be safe there." She had appreciated the gesture but had brushed it off at first, convinced she could manage on her own. Now, with the storm raging around her, the words came back with a new weight. She thought about the risks. The roads were low and close to the river. Even a little rain could cause flooding. Her cabin was near the edge of a slope, where water tended to collect. If the storm worsened overnight, she could easily become trapped. She also realized that, while she had enough food and water for a few hours, the storm could last much longer, and her small wood stove might not be enough to keep the cabin warm if the wind cut through the walls. A sense of unease crept over her. Maria had always been independent. She prided herself on being able to handle challenges alone, relying on her own skills, knowledge, and resourcefulness. But this was different. This was not something she could control, no matter how experienced or strong she was. For the first time in a long while, she felt a twinge of fear and a reluctant recognition that maybe asking for help wasn't a weakness. She got up and moved to the door, thinking she might call John. Her fingers hovered over her phone, hesitating. What if the storm had made it impossible for him to come? What if she embarrassed herself by asking for help she didn't really need yet? Maria shook her head. Pride was one thing, but safety was another. She typed a short message, simple and cautious. "Hi, John. I think I might need your help. Is your offer still good?" She stared at the screen, waiting for a response, each roll of thunder making her flinch. Time seemed to stretch, every second heavy with anticipation. Then almost immediately her phone buzzed. John's reply was short but steady, just as she had expected. "Yes, stay inside, I'll come get you." Relief flooded her chest, but it was mixed with a nervous fluttering in her stomach. She had never relied on anyone like this, and now she would be crossing the road in a storm, leaving her cabin unprotected and trusting someone she barely knew. She pulled on her jacket, tightened the hood around her face, and picked up a small bag with her essential belongings: water, a few snacks, a flashlight, and her phone. Outside, the storm was even worse. Rain fell in sheets so thick that it blurred everything beyond a few feet. Wind tore at her jacket, pushing her back as she stepped carefully onto the muddy path. Each footstep sank slightly into the wet earth, and she had to pause to steady herself. The river near her cabin had begun to swell, its surface churning and frothing as the rain poured down. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the dark, rolling waters, and the sound of thunder followed almost immediately. Maria's heart pounded, but she pressed on. She reached the edge of the road, glancing toward John's ranch house. Even in the storm, it looked solid, safe, almost inviting. She spotted the faint glow of lights from the windows and the outline of his truck moving slowly through the rain. Her heart lifted at the sight, a small but powerful comfort. John had been preparing for this moment as well. As soon as he received her message, he grabbed his heavy jacket and boots and headed toward the truck. The storm was relentless, but he knew the roads and the terrain intimately. Driving slowly and carefully, he navigated the muddy, waterlogged path, eyes scanning constantly for fallen branches or hidden ruts. He had grown up in this land and had faced many storms before, but he never underestimated the danger. Even someone as skilled as he could get caught off guard. When he finally spotted Maria struggling against the wind and rain, his chest tightened with concern. He parked the truck as close to the cabin as the road allowed and jumped out, moving quickly through the storm to reach her. "Come on," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "I've got you." Maria hurried toward him, the mud sucking at her boots, rain soaking through her jacket. John helped her into the truck, steadying her as she climbed inside. She sank into the seat, grateful for the warmth and safety, but still shivering. The truck smelled of leather, coffee, and the faint tang of hay from the ranch, a comforting combination in that moment. "Hold on," John said, starting the engine. The tires spun slightly in the wet mud, but he maneuvered carefully onto the road. Water splashed against the sides, and wind pushed against the truck like a living force trying to push them back. Maria gripped the seat, heart racing, but trusted him completely. As they drove, the storm's intensity became even more apparent. Branches and small debris littered the road. In some places, the water was high enough that the truck's wheels cut through it, sending waves over the hood. Lightning flashed again, and the thunder shook the vehicle. Maria felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was unlike anything she had experienced in the city, where storms came and went without the threat of isolation. John's voice broke through the chaos, calm and steady. "Almost there," he said. "Just a little further." His knowledge of the land and the roads gave her a sense of reassurance. She realized that he had offered more than shelter. He had offered safety, guidance, and presence in a moment that could have been dangerous on her own. When they finally reached the ranch house, John helped Maria inside. Warm air, the smell of cooking, and the sturdy walls enveloped her. The storm was still raging outside, but inside she felt protected in a way she hadn't felt for hours. Her wet jacket dripped onto the floor and she wrung her hair, laughing nervously at the contrast between the storm outside and the calm inside. John handed her a towel and offered a hot cup of tea. "You're safe now," he said. "Sit down, warm up." Maria accepted the cup, letting the warmth seep into her hands and chest. She watched the storm through the large windows of the ranch house. The rain was falling in relentless sheets, lightning splitting the sky and the wind bending the trees. But she was dry, warm, and safe, and for the first time in hours she could breathe without anxiety. As they sat together, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop, Maria realized something important. This night had shown her the value of trust and human connection. She had always been proud and independent, but she now understood that there was strength in accepting help when it was offered sincerely. It didn't make her weak, it made her human. John, for his part, didn't speak much. He poured himself a cup of coffee and glanced at Maria. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had been able to help. The storm was still strong, but inside his home, he felt calm. Life on the ranch had taught him many things: how to read the weather, how to work the land, how to care for animals. But tonight had reminded him of another lesson: the importance of watching out for the people around you. The night stretched on and the storm continued to rage. But inside the ranch house, Maria and John found a rhythm of quiet conversation, shared stories, and the comfort of mutual understanding. The storm outside was a force of nature, untamed and wild, but the warmth inside was human, deliberate, and unshakable. By the time the first signs of morning light began to filter through the clouds, the rain had slowed and the wind had softened. Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the shelter and safety, but also for the reminder that kindness, trust, and connection could appear even in the most challenging circumstances. That night, the storm had tested them both, but it had also brought them together in a way that neither could have anticipated. And as the light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the land in soft gold and silver, Maria knew that her relationship with John, the ranch, and the land was only beginning to change. The morning after the storm began quietly, but Maria felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Through the window of John's ranch house, she could see the world outside slowly recovering. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the pale, weak sunlight breaking through the gray clouds. The wind had calmed, though it still whispered through the trees. Birds cautiously emerged, calling to each other as they hopped along the damp branches. Maria wrapped her hands around a warm mug of tea, sitting at the kitchen table, and stared out at the landscape. The ranch looked different now, washed clean by the storm. The fences that John had worked so hard to repair still stood strong. The cattle were safe and grazing quietly in the distance, and the house itself looked solid and unshakable against the aftermath of the storm. She thought about her own cabin across the road, small and vulnerable, and realized that without John's offer and quick action, she might have faced serious danger. Sitting there, Maria felt something new stirring in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of humility she wasn't used to. She had spent years in the city, relying on herself and her own judgment, and yet this one storm had shown her that independence had limits. Even the strongest, most capable person could find themselves at the mercy of forces beyond control. And sometimes, accepting help wasn't a failure, it was a form of wisdom. John appeared from the hallway, carrying a plate of fresh biscuits and a small bowl of fruit. He placed them on the table with a simple nod. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept okay." Maria smiled, feeling the warmth in her chest at his calm, steady presence. "Better than I thought I would," she admitted. "Your place, it's so solid." "I didn't realize how much I'd appreciate it until last night." John shrugged slightly, brushing crumbs from the edge of the plate. "It's just a house. It keeps people safe during storms. That's all I care about." His words were plain, but Maria sensed something deeper beneath them, a quiet sense of responsibility, not just for his own family or his ranch, but for the people around him. She ate in silence for a moment, watching the sunlight touch the wet grass outside. Thoughts tumbled through her mind. What would her neighbors think if they saw her now? Accepting help from John Reynolds, the quiet rancher she barely knew, would they say she was weak, proud? She shook her head, realizing it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was alive, safe, and had someone she could trust in a moment of need. After breakfast, John suggested they check on the land and the livestock together. Maria agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because she felt she owed him her attention. The storm had changed the landscape, leaving the paths muddy and treacherous. Small branches had fallen from trees, and puddles had formed in places where water rarely collected. Walking alongside John, Maria noticed how effortlessly he navigated the terrain. He knew every dip, rise, and hidden hazard, moving with confidence and calm. "You know this land so well," Maria said, tilting her head to look at him. "You don't even have to think about where you step," John chuckled softly. "Been at it my whole life. You learn where to walk, where to avoid, and how to read the signs." He gestured toward a patch of trampled grass near a fence. "The storm passed through here last night. Some of the fences were close to breaking, but nothing too bad. We'll fix it this afternoon." Maria nodded, impressed. She had never lived on a ranch before, had never had to manage cattle or fences, and yet she found herself fascinated by the rhythm of John's life. Each step he took, each careful adjustment he made to the gates or paths, seemed deliberate and necessary. He treated the land with respect, almost as if it were alive, and she found herself admiring not just his skill, but his connection to the world around him. As they worked together, repairing minor damages from the storm, Maria felt a sense of partnership forming. She offered to help where she could, picking up branches, tightening loose fence posts, even learning to handle some of the smaller tasks with John's guidance. He accepted her help without complaint, offering gentle instructions and encouragement. "Not bad," he said, when she managed to secure a gate properly. "You've got a steady hand." Maria felt a flush of pride, but also a warm sense of belonging. For the first time since returning to this area, she felt connected to someone in a way that went beyond polite neighborliness. After a while, they paused near the barn to catch their breath. Maria leaned against the wood, watching the clouds slowly break apart above. The storm had left the air fresh and clean, and the sunlight now streamed through the mist, creating shimmering reflections on the puddles and dew-covered grass. Birds swooped and landed on the fence posts, calling to each other as if celebrating the end of the storm. John looked at her, noticing her thoughtful expression. "You okay?" he asked. Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking. Last night was intense and I realized something. I was stubborn, thinking I could handle everything myself. But sometimes, even when you're used to standing alone, you need to accept help. I'm glad you were there." John gave her a small, respectful nod. "We all need help sometimes. Doesn't make you weak, makes you human." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. Maria had spent much of her life proving her strength, but here, in the aftermath of the storm, she understood that real strength could include trust, patience, and letting others in. It was a lesson she had learned slowly, but now it felt clear. The day went on, and Maria continued to work alongside John, helping wherever she could. As they repaired the fences and tended to the livestock, their conversation shifted from practical matters to stories about the land and their pasts. Maria shared tales of her childhood in the area, the traditions of her Apache heritage, and the lessons her elders had taught her about resilience and respect for nature. John, in turn, spoke of growing up on the ranch, learning from his father and grandfather, and the quiet satisfaction of a life connected to the land. The more they talked, the more Maria realized how much they had in common, despite the differences in their backgrounds. Both valued hard work, honesty, and living in harmony with the natural world. Both had faced challenges that tested their patience and determination, and both had, in their own way, learned the importance of helping others when the situation demanded it. By late afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds fully, casting golden light across the wet grass. The storm had passed, leaving a sense of calm and renewal. Maria stood on the porch of the ranch house, looking out at the land she had almost faced alone the night before. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for John's help, but for the reminder that life could be unpredictable, and yet kindness and human connection could make all the difference. John joined her on the porch, leaning against the railing. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the cattle graze and the trees sway gently in the softened wind. Then he spoke quietly. "You know, storms like last night, they test more than just the land. They test people too. And sometimes, you find out who's there for you when it really counts." Maria nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She had faced the storm alone in her cabin, had considered her options, and had ultimately made the decision to trust him. That decision had changed the course of the night, her safety, and perhaps even the course of their growing friendship. As the evening approached, John invited Maria to stay for dinner. They cooked a simple meal together in the warm kitchen, laughing over small mistakes and sharing stories of storms they had survived in the past. The meal was more than just food. It was a celebration of life, resilience, and the bond that had formed between them in a single night. By the time Maria finally returned to her cabin later that evening, she carried with her a sense of calm and security she hadn't expected. The storm had tested her courage, patience, and independence, but it had also revealed the value of trust, the strength found in accepting help, and the quiet power of human kindness. That night, as she lay in her bed, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl, Maria realized that the storm had done more than damage. It had opened a door. A door to new friendships, new understanding, and a deeper connection to the land and the people around her. And she knew, without a doubt, that the events of that day would stay with her forever, shaping the way she saw the world, her neighbors, and herself. The day after the storm had left the land washed and renewed, Maria woke early, the sunlight streaming softly through the window. The ranch house felt warmer and more secure than her own cabin ever had, and for a moment she lingered in bed, listening to the distant sounds of the land waking up. Birds chirped, the wind rustled gently through the trees, and somewhere in the distance the cattle lowed softly. Life had returned to its natural rhythm, but Maria knew that the aftermath of the storm still demanded attention. She dressed quickly and joined John in the kitchen. He was already preparing breakfast, moving with the calm efficiency that she had noticed since the first moment she had met him. The smell of coffee and frying eggs filled the air, a comforting counterpoint to the memories of the night before. "Morning," John said, glancing at her with a small smile. "We've got work to do. Some of the fences took more damage than I thought, and the cattle may have wandered a bit when the water rose." Maria nodded, her mind focused. She had seen how careful John was during the storm, how he had guided her through the dangerous night. Now she wanted to contribute, to help with whatever was needed, and to show that she could be a reliable partner in the work ahead. They walked together across the ranch, the mud soft and slippery beneath their boots. Maria followed John closely, observing the changes the storm had left behind. The low-lying areas were still covered in shallow pools of water, and several fallen branches blocked parts of the trail. The fences, while mostly standing, had bent or cracked in places, and John made note of each problem as they went. As they worked, Maria felt a mixture of determination and anxiety. She had helped before, but today would be different. The storm had shifted something inside her, an awareness that nature was powerful and unpredictable. She understood that the work they were doing was urgent. If they didn't act quickly, some of the fences could fail, allowing the cattle to wander into dangerous areas or off the property entirely. John noticed her focus and nodded approvingly. "Good eyes," he said. "Keep an eye on that fence line over there." The wind pushed a tree branch onto the top wire, and it could snap if we don't secure it. Maria stepped carefully toward the fence, her hands steady despite the tension in her chest. As she reached the damaged section, she realized just how fragile the balance of the ranch had become after the storm. A sudden gust of wind shook the trees, rattling the branches overhead. Maria jumped, momentarily startled, but John's calm presence reassured her. "Careful," he said gently, moving closer to help steady the branch. "We'll do this together." Together, they lifted the branch just enough to secure the fence wire, working side by side. The physical labor was challenging, but it also felt empowering. Maria discovered a strength she hadn't realized she had, the ability to act decisively under pressure, to make careful judgments, and to trust both herself and John. As they continued across the ranch, a shout from the far pasture broke the rhythm of their work. One of the younger cattle had wandered too close to a shallow creek, the water still swollen from the storm. It was struggling to find solid ground, and if it slipped, it could be injured or worse. "Quick!" John shouted, pointing. "We need to guide it back before it panics." Maria's heart raced. She had handled animals before, but not under such stressful conditions. She ran toward the frightened cow, calling softly to calm it, while John maneuvered from the other side, guiding it toward the safety of the pasture. The wind whistled around them, carrying the scent of wet earth and grass. Rain from the previous night still clung to their hair and clothes, and every movement had to be calculated. The cow hesitated, teetering on the muddy bank of the creek. Maria stepped closer, raising her arms in a slow, steady motion to encourage it forward. John shouted directions, his voice firm but calm. For a tense moment, it seemed as if the animal might panic and run back into the water, but then, slowly, it followed Maria's gestures and John's guidance, finally reaching the solid ground safely. Maria exhaled deeply, her heart still pounding. She turned to John, who gave her a small smile and a nod of approval. "See, you handled that well. That cow trusted you, and so did I." The experience left Maria with a new understanding of herself and her relationship with John. The storm had tested them both, not just physically but emotionally. Trust, patience, and teamwork had become essential. The night of fear, the decision to accept help, and the challenges of the morning had built a bond stronger than either of them had expected. After securing the cattle, they continued to assess the damage across the ranch. Several fences needed more significant repairs, and parts of the trail required clearing. Maria moved with purpose, carrying tools, tying wires, and assisting wherever she could. John guided her patiently, offering encouragement and instructions, but never taking over completely. He allowed her to learn through experience, to make mistakes safely, and to discover the depth of her own capabilities. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, clouds began to break apart, and the sky turned a bright, clear blue. The contrast between the storm's chaos and the calm now settling over the ranch made the work feel urgent yet hopeful. Maria realized that storms, while dangerous, could also reveal strength, resilience, and the value of human connection. They stopped for a short break near the barn. Maria wiped sweat from her brow and looked around at the land they had managed to secure. The fences were standing, the cattle were safe, and the storm's damage had been mitigated. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but also a growing awareness of how much she had relied on John, and how much she had learned from him. John noticed her thoughtful expression. "You've done good work today," he said. "Not many people would jump in and handle things the way you did." Maria smiled a little shyly. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. I've never had someone I could trust like this before. Last night I didn't know if I'd be safe. Today I see why I needed to accept your help." John nodded quietly. "It's not about being strong alone. It's about knowing when to stand together. That's what matters." The words resonated deeply with Maria. She had spent much of her life proving her independence, but now she understood that strength was also about connection, courage, and the willingness to trust. The storm had been a trial, but it had also been a teacher, showing her the power of human kindness and teamwork. By late afternoon, they finished the last of the urgent repairs. Maria felt exhausted but satisfied. The ranch was secure, the cattle were safe, and the bond between her and John had grown in ways neither could have anticipated. She realized that the turning point of the storm had not been the danger itself, but the choice she had made, to trust, to accept help, and to step fully into a partnership that combined experience, care, and mutual respect. As they walked back to the ranch house, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the wet landscape. Puddles reflected the colors of the sky, and the trees swayed gently in the soft evening breeze. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the peace and security that had been missing from her life for so long. John glanced at her with a small smile. "You did well today," he said simply. "I'm glad you were here." Maria smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest that went beyond gratitude. "I'm glad I trusted you," she said softly. "I didn't know I needed help until I accepted it. Now I see how important it is." The storm had brought them together, tested their courage, and taught them lessons they would never forget. It had been a moment of fear and uncertainty, but it had also been a moment of growth, understanding, and human connection. Maria knew that the events of that day would shape her for years to come, reminding her always that trust, kindness, and collaboration were as essential as strength and independence. As the last light of day faded and stars began to appear in the clear sky, Maria and John stood together on the porch of the ranch house. The storm was gone, the land was safe, and a new bond had been forged. For Maria, this was more than just the end of a difficult day. It was the beginning of a new understanding of life, community, and the power of helping each other when it mattered most. The morning after the intense storm had finally passed was calm and quiet. The land looked refreshed, as if it had been washed clean and renewed. Sunlight spilled over the fields, glinting on the puddles that still dotted the trails. The gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of wet soil, mixed with the faint aroma of hay from the barns. Birds sang softly, moving carefully across the damp branches, and the cattle wandered slowly through the pastures, their coats shiny from the rain. Maria stood on the porch of John's ranch house, taking in the view. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The storm had been frightening, even dangerous, but it had also changed something deep inside her. It had taught her the value of trust, of asking for help when needed, and of the strength that comes from relying on others. For the first time since returning to the area, she felt completely connected to the land, to the people, and to herself. She turned as John stepped onto the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her, and she wrapped her hands around the warmth. For a moment they both stood silently, simply enjoying the calm after the storm. The night had been long and challenging, the following day filled with hard work, yet somehow, the experience felt lighter now. "You're up early," John said, smiling slightly. "I couldn't sleep," Maria admitted. "I kept thinking about the storm, about everything that happened, and about how much I needed help." She paused, looking out across the fields. "And how much it meant that you were there." John nodded quietly. "It's what neighbors do. We look out for each other. It doesn't matter how long we've known someone. It's about being there when it counts." Maria smiled softly. She remembered the fear she had felt in her cabin, the hesitation to reach out, and the relief when John had arrived. That night had been the turning point, the moment that taught her about human kindness in a way words alone could not. She realized that her pride and independence, while important, did not need to prevent her from accepting care and guidance. Strength was not always about standing alone. After breakfast, John suggested they take a walk across the ranch to check that everything was secure and undamaged from the storm's aftermath. Maria agreed, eager to continue learning about the land and helping in any way she could. As they walked, the world around them seemed quiet and alive at the same time. The sun was higher in the sky now, casting long shadows and warming the wet earth. Small flowers, bent but resilient, peeked through the mud, and birds flew overhead in playful patterns. The land was recovering, and so were they. John led her first to the fence lines, which had been the most affected. Several sections required minor repairs, and Maria helped where she could. She tied loose wires, lifted fallen posts, and carried tools, learning the rhythm of ranch work from John's patient guidance. He didn't rush her, but he encouraged her to pay attention to details, teaching her the importance of foresight and caution. "You're getting the hang of this," he said after she successfully secured a particularly tricky section of fence. "You're steady, careful, and you think before acting. That's what matters out here." Maria felt a sense of pride mixed with humility. She had always been resourceful in her own way, but working on the ranch with John gave her a new perspective. It wasn't just about completing tasks. It was about understanding the land, respecting its power, and working with someone she could trust. After the fences were checked, they moved toward the pastures where the cattle grazed. Most were calm now, but a few younger ones were curious and playful, wandering close to areas where the ground was still soft from the storm. Maria observed carefully, learning how to guide them without startling them. She noticed how John's presence alone seemed to calm the animals, and she began to mimic his posture and gestures, seeing how patience and confidence could influence even the most restless of creatures. While walking, Maria reflected on the past 2 days. The storm had been a test, not just of the land but of character and relationships. It had forced her to confront her own pride, her desire to be independent at all costs, and her hesitation to trust others. Now she understood that being part of a community, even a small one, meant giving and receiving support. It meant noticing when someone needed help and offering it, and also recognizing when accepting help was the wisest choice. As they worked, John shared stories of storms he had faced in the past. Some were small and easily managed, while others had caused serious damage, requiring long days of repair and careful planning. Maria listened intently, absorbing not just the knowledge but the calm confidence that came from experience. She realized that John's strength was not just in his physical abilities, but in his patience, wisdom, and willingness to teach. By late afternoon, the work was complete. The ranch was secure, the cattle safe, and the fences repaired. Maria felt exhausted, but the fatigue was accompanied by satisfaction and pride. She had contributed meaningfully, learned valuable lessons, and deepened her bond with John. She realized that the experience had not only strengthened her skills, but also strengthened her understanding of trust, connection, and responsibility. As they returned to the ranch house, John suggested they rest for a while. Maria sat on the porch, letting the sunlight warm her damp clothes, while John moved inside to tend to some small tasks in the kitchen. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. The storm had been frightening, but it had also revealed something she hadn't realized she needed: a friend, a guide, and a companion who valued both her independence and her willingness to accept support. When John returned with a pitcher of lemonade, they sat together on the porch, drinking in silence for a few moments. Maria glanced across the fields, noticing how the land seemed calmer now, almost renewed, and she reflected on how much she had changed in just a couple of days. Fear had given way to trust. Hesitation had given way to confidence. Isolation had given way to connection. "You know," she said finally, "I never realized how much I needed this. Not just the shelter last night, but this. Your guidance, your patience, everything." John smiled quietly. "Sometimes it takes a storm to remind us what's important," he said. "The land, the animals, the people around us, we notice when we're forced to. And sometimes we learn things about ourselves we wouldn't otherwise." Maria nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had learned that independence was valuable, but it wasn't everything. Strength could include trust, humility, and the courage to accept help when necessary. The storm had tested her in ways she hadn't expected, but it had also given her something she hadn't realized she needed: connection, understanding, and a sense of belonging. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Maria and John continued to sit on the porch, talking quietly about life, the land, and the lessons of the storm. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the soft lowing of cattle returning to their resting spots. There was a serenity in the moment, a sense that despite the challenges they had faced, life had a way of balancing itself. Later, as night fell, Maria prepared to return to her cabin across the road. She packed her small bag, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. The ranch had become more than a temporary shelter. It had become a place of learning, reflection, and connection. She turned to John, who was standing nearby, watching the stars begin to appear in the clear night sky. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything. For last night, for today, for showing me that it's okay to accept help." John nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "You're welcome, and remember, this isn't the last storm we'll face, but now you know you don't have to face it alone." Maria smiled, feeling the warmth of his words. She walked across the road toward her cabin, glancing back one last time at the ranch house, the lights glowing softly in the night. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had learned something important, not just about storms, but about life, trust, and human connection. Inside her cabin, Maria set her bag down and looked around. The storm had left signs of its presence: the faint smell of wet wood, the small debris carried in by the wind, but it also left her with a new perspective. She felt ready to face future challenges, knowing that strength was not always about standing alone, but sometimes about reaching out, trusting others, and accepting the support offered with kindness. That night, as Maria lay in bed, she thought about the storm, the ranch, and the friendship that had formed between her and John. She realized that this experience would stay with her forever, shaping her understanding of independence, trust, and community. The storm had been a challenge, but it had also been a gift, a lesson in resilience, connection, and the quiet power of human kindness. Outside, the stars twinkled in the clear night sky, the world calm once more. Maria closed her eyes, feeling a sense of gratitude and hope. She knew that no matter what storms came in the future, she would carry the lessons of this one with her, and that she had someone she could trust, someone who valued both her strength and her willingness to accept support. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the land she had always loved and the people she had come to respect, Maria felt a deep and lasting peace, a knowledge that even in the hardest storms, there could be safety, friendship, and hope.